Good morning, and welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. It's the 24th of June, 2022, and we've made a quick run up to Wildwood this late morning to test our luck and simply see what would come our way. About an hour into this morning's wait, an A782, the Wildwood local, shows up from the south. They had just gone down to Turnpike to pick up a train to bring back to the yard, with a very interesting pair of GP39-2s. CSX only acquired 20 of these for their roster way back when, and I believe only 17 or 18 remain active today. So it was very interesting to see a duo of them set up for this local here based out of Wildwood. We're on the CSX Wildwood subdivision, for the most part the S-line, around milepost S761. And even though in its heydays Wildwood used to be an ice plant, a locomotive shop, a passenger station, and a division point, today it's all but a jointed rail staging yard that originates only this A782. Which today would be bringing up this loaded consist down from Turnpike, which had presumably been dropped by a mixed freight train a day before. The consist looked to be mostly loaded, which made me guess that this stuff would likely be organized in the yard and sent out to customers in the area over the next week or so. It consisted of gondolas, loaded covered hoppers, loaded rock hoppers, tank cars, including this very interesting one, and some other miscellaneous boxcars. 782 handles customer traffic from anywhere between Zephyr Hills and Ocala, and the stuff for these places only gets to Wildwood Yard by mixed freights dropping them off along their trips to other places. And just to add to the confusion, CSX's symbol changes have just about wiped out every old symbol in the state of Florida by now. Although they were still using the symbol A782 at the time of this recording, it would have been switched to its new L for local symbol within the next few days. Up until this point, CSX had given all of their locals a different letter prefix based upon the region of the US that they ran in, with such not being the case anymore, and every region using the L prefix to designate local. And as for the old A782, the new symbol for this guy is now L753. We wouldn't be following the Wildwood local today though, because they weren't doing any work that I had interest in, and just a few minutes after they had gotten into the yard here, the signal mast just to our south had improved to a medium approach, which would be telling a southbound train to proceed under the signal bridge at medium speed through turnouts, crossovers, or switches, all while preparing to stop at the very next signal ahead. This signal, turning back to the north, would be for train M453. The new M for Manifest symbol, designated for the daily mixed freight train out of Waycross, Georgia, bound for Miami. And this is one of the trains that works Wildwood Yard on its way south, dropping stuff for the various industries that today's 782 would handle. They'd pull down to Wildwood on track 2 as A782 was doing work on track 1 north of the yard. They'd bring the train to a stop just north of the bridge, before cutting off the 4 lead motors from the train and sending them down to the Wildwood crossovers.
453. Did the dispatcher tell you you're coming off with 4 engines, leaving the bottom 2 engines in the south end of track 2 in the yard, taking the 28 empties out at WO1?
Can you put them on the south end of 3 or 4 for me, or do you need them in 2?
No, we can put them in either track, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, 3 or 4 would be better so I can just shove straight to Conrad when I come back.
Alright, that's fine. M453, just put them in 3 or 4.
453 would send their engines across to track 1 and then onto the Wildwood Yard lead. This would bring the locomotives into the yard, and originally I had presumed this would just be to work the yard, but they were also going to drop those 2 bottom engines as per the dispatch orders. Why wasn't exactly apparent to me at the time, but we'd come to find out fairly shortly. Of note in this curious 4-engine lash-up would be CSX number 4533 and the lead motor 5270. These locomotives, even though 5270 is much cleaner, both wear the new CSX website livery, which is essentially the same design as the older Yellownose 3, except this scheme includes the CSX website link beneath the X on the side of the locomotive. Personally, I like this new scheme a lot. To me, the website link is almost like a little signature beneath the actual company logo. In any case, this scheme is very new, and a lot of locomotives have been going into this scheme lately, so it was of much interest to me to see that 5270 leading, as clearly it hasn't had the paint on the body for very long. It's still got that beautiful shine on it. As ordered by dispatch, 453 would bring the 2 bottom locomotives onto track 4 and cut them off from the other 2. These 2 identical ES40 DC GEVOs would be the final power to pull 453 down to Winston and ultimately Miami. But just before takeoff, 453 would have to pick up 1 set of cars from Wildwood, that being a line of empty rock hoppers ready to go back south for another load.
15, 10, 6, okay. 270, clear all tracking on should.
It is just so darn hot. Stuff is overheating. I think I might be, but clearly these guys are not. They're now pulling their empty rock hoppers out of that track, and I assume they're gonna put them on the rest of their train here in a moment once they get past the connection down there, past I think it's Lynham Street down there. And speaking of action, .453 is back on number 2, and they're putting these hoppers on their train now. 453 picks up empty hoppers here at Wildwood for reloading in the various lime rock quarries down in South Florida. And it was all but an addition to what was about to be a 14,029 foot long consist. However, just before 453 took off southbound, we heard that the 2 locomotives they dropped were going to pull L729 north from Wildwood today. A new rock train creation this year following all of these new symbol changes. This job designed to shuttle primarily empty rock hoppers from Winston, Wildwood, Baldwin, and Waycross back to a rock mine in Brown Sand, Georgia. That said, this job normally originates from Winston, but for whatever reason, they're originating him today out of Wildwood using the 2 locomotives that 453 just dropped in the yard. They'd be to pick up about 85 empty aggregate hoppers out of the Conrad Yelvington just south of Wildwood to take north today. 453 would then get a quick train evaluation, which I'll play here, before heading south, which we would then follow close behind.
Item 453, over.
Ready to head south whenever we get enough pressure.
If I'm looking at it right now, it's 134 loads, 84 empties, 18,219 tons, and 14,029 feet. Is that right?
Correct.
All right. It'll be okay to pull from where you stand when you're ready. Over.
All right, to pull from where we stand with this illegal train stop.
Well, I don't know what's illegal about it, but if there's anything illegal, have you discussed it with the MTO?
Well, we're just over on link for non-DP, but I guess all that's been cleared.
Yeah, I discussed that with the MTO earlier. Over.
Yeah, that's the only thing. The rules say we're over length, but I guess it's been cleared to them.
That's correct. Over.
And so that's an interesting one. I've never heard them say over the radio that they've possibly got an illegal train style before, although I did find it a bit odd that they were running almost 20,000 tons with only 8,000 horsepower of locomotive online. But as they said, I guess it had been cleared to run. So we too would run, but with much more ample horsepower for our load, down the S-line right alongside 453. The next stop along our journey south would be Owensboro. And right in here is that interesting stretch of the S-line where it actually isn't the S-line. This actually came up as a point of confusion a couple videos ago, so I figured I'd take the time here to explain it for those who don't know. Firstly, the CSX S and A lines through Florida are called their respective names for the Seaboard Airline and Atlantic Coast Line, which used to own the two. The Seaboard Airline is the S line that continued through Wildwood, Bushnell, and Lacoochee. However, right through this curve here at Owensboro, it becomes the Atlantic Coast Line through Dade City and on to Vitis. This is because, back in the day, the Seaboard Airline never curved here at Owensboro. It kept going straight and continued down south to Zephyr Hills, continuing into Tampa via Plant City and Valrico. And the Atlantic Coast Line was an entirely separate route that didn't curve here either. It also continued straight through Trilby and on to Dunellen. However, when the Seaboard Airline and Atlantic Coast Lines merged to form the SCL in 1967, the southern portion of the Seaboard Airline from Lacoochee down to Zephyr Hills was abandoned and ripped out. That was when the switch was put in to conjoin the Seaboard onto the former Atlantic Coast Line. The former Atlantic Coast Line stretched through Trilby remained in operation through the SCL and was abandoned in the mid-1980s under CSX and ripped out not long after. However, the Atlantic Coast Line stretch was preserved in a walking/biking trail. The With-Lacoochee trailhead for this branch begins right across the road from Owensboro. And after both of these branches were ripped out, the giant curve here at Owensboro is all that remained. So, south of Lacoochee, the S line was literally turned onto the ACL's R line continuing south through Dade City and through Vitis. The connection was added from Vitis to Zephyr Hills to reconjoin the Seaboard with the Atlantic Coast Line, which is why, in Zephyr Hills, it transitions back to the S line. So much for the history lesson. But making the turn from the former SAL to the former ACL would be our M453, with 14,000 feet of commerce right on the heels. Hot on the heels of 453 as we pull into Dade City. I'd stop off real quickly at the depot for a photo, which would welcome us with its all too familiar red brick design and white roof supports. Only the coastline did that.
453, 24, lead engine, CSX David 270, approach medium, south end, southbound.
And now the final stretch on the old Lakeland Highway that would bring us into Vitis. We'd stop off one more time for a shot of the train leading into Richland. As 453 reached his end, I decided to move down to Vitis Junction to shoot the bottom of his train leaving the scene. We'd make it down to Vitis just as the auto racks came into view, and Vitis is where 453 will turn off of the Wildwood subdivision and run down the Vitis subdivision through the Green Swamp and down into Lakeland and Winston Yard. Now fully onto the Vitis subdivision, 453 was now out of sight and out of mind. Our chase with him was over, but it would be red signals almost everywhere for the next hour. So before calling it a day, we decided to run back up to one of the most namesake towns along the former Atlantic coastline route to Dunellen, that being Trilby, a town that only covers a single square mile of land and only houses about 300 residents. This town, especially on its outskirts, is one of the few places left that you can really still call Old Florida. The counties are still finding ways to insert roundabouts into the center of town, but you get the idea. And right on the west side of that roundabout is what would have been at one time a railroad crossing, but is now all but a trail crossing. The Withlacoochee Trail that sits on the old right-of-way of the ACL crosses Trilby Road at what is now a quiet country neighborhood. A mile or two north of this crossing at one time was the Trilby Rail Yard, which during its years of operation held the title of the third largest rail yard in the state. But now there's no trace that there was ever a railroad here. Of course, the trail sits on what used to be the main right-of-way, and there is a mural that vaguely tells the story of the two predecessor roads back at the trailhead in Owensboro, but with many rail trails going in today, many are leaving little to no remnants anywhere else that there was ever a rail line in its place. And I guess, with that said, such is a secret that only we railroaders will possess. Never again will you be able to hear the sound of a Leslie horn legally blowing the pattern for this crossing, or the sound of giant steel wheels rolling over rail joints right through these trees. I can only imagine standing at a scene like this in the middle of the night and looking at a headlight down what used to be a track here. But the same's to be said with many things nowadays. You get what you get. And at least, in some areas, the story still exists. So at least there will always be some ways for some people to always remember what once was new. Thanks for tagging along with me on this railroading adventure today. I'll hope to see you again very soon, and in Trilby, Florida, along the former ACL Main, this is Kotabeaner, and I'll see you next time upon the Sunshine State Rails.